your spouse is working, but you think about retirement. You think about that day where you don't have to go into the office every day to make money. Is that anybody in here? Nobody on this side. Okay, a couple. Alhamdulillah. So my name is Hood Williams. I am the regional manager for Amana Mutual Funds. And just a little bit about my background. I was born in Washington, D.C. to two Muslim parents. I grew up between Maryland and Virginia. I went to Old Dominion University and graduated with an undergrad in economics. And then I furthered my education with an MBA at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. After Georgia Tech, I actually worked in corporate finance. And so while I was working in corporate finance, I actually took a year off from work to pursue one of my passions, which is Islamic finance. And I moved to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur, and I studied Islamic finance at the International Center for Education in Islamic Finance. After being there a year with my wife, and I had two young sons at the time, we moved back to Atlanta, Georgia, and I continued my career in corporate finance. And then 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to work as a regional manager for Amana Mutual Funds. And so I moved to Dallas, Texas. But a little bit about this passion that I have for Islamic finance. And that really started when I was actually working at a masjid in Virginia. So I was a youth director of the All Dulles Area Muslim Society in Sterling, Virginia, where I got a chance to really work in the community, and I really enjoyed it. But one of my passions has always been business. Like, how can we make sure that our community is not only engaged, but they're also engaged financially. They understand personal finance. They're growing their wealth, right? And they're not growing their wealth so they can have a fancy car for a big house. That's nice. But they're growing their wealth especially so they can give back to the community, so that we can build institutions, right? So we can give zakat, so we can help the Muslim community. And so one of the reasons that this started for me, that was so passionate, is I went to a program on Islamic finance at George Mason University in Virginia, right? And they brought a sheikh who came in from out of country. And I'm going to tell you what he said, okay? I'm going to give you a summary of what he said. He said investing is haram, banking is haram, insurance is haram, and financing is haram. And after he finished his conversation, he got off the stage, he went back to the hotel, he packed his bags, and he went back to the country that he came from. And this left me thinking, what do I do here? This is my home. This is our home. How do we make Islamic finance work here, so we don't have to choose between doing what's right for ourselves and our family and our future, and doing what's right for our religion and our deen? That there's this middle path. I was talking to this Muslim sister in Minnesota, right? And I was asking her about her investments. And she said, look, Brotherhood, this is 2024. A lot of those rules I can't really relate to. So I just do whatever in my investments. And I said, okay. I said, well, would you, as a Muslim woman, would you go work at a brewery? And she was like, no, of course not. I wouldn't work at a brewery. I'm a Muslim. I said, okay. I said, so as a Muslim woman, would you go work at a casino? And then she got a little attitude. She put her hand on her hip. She said, look at me. Do you think I'll work at a casino? So I said, if you won't work at a brewery, if you won't work at a casino, why do you want to own it in your portfolio? She said, I never thought about that. I said, I know, because I'm good at what I do. So alhamdulillah. So that's what we're talking about. How can we align what we do in our personal lives, but what we're doing in our investment lives, so that we don't have to sacrifice when you see your investment returns and feel bad about it? Okay, so we're going to get into this presentation. So an investment according to Islamic principles. So the first thing is a disclosure, is that whenever you're investing, requires taking on risk. So that means that past performance is not going to be a guarantee of future performance. I was actually talking to a brother out here just a few minutes ago. He said, how's your investment been over the last 5 or 10 years? I said, oh, it's been marvelous. It's been wonderful. I said, well, he said, if you invested amount of money, how much would it be? I said, well, if you invested $10,000 in our growth fund in 2014, it'll be worth $40,000 right now. And then he asked me, he might be in this room, he said, well, what is it going to be like in another 10 years? I said, if I knew that, right? If I knew that, I would be a wizard. I wouldn't be here. I would be at home. So, alhamdulillah. And so what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to talk about the importance of investing, right? We're going to talk about what it means to be an Islamic investment company. Number 3, we're going to talk about things that are important to parents and to grandparents about how you can save and invest for your son or your daughter or your grandchildren. We're going to talk about professionals and how can professionals make sure they're doing what they can now to prepare for their retirement later. Number 3, we're going to talk about business owners. If you own a business, how can you lower your taxes and also invest in your future? And then if we have time, we're going to also talk about what can we do as an institution, right? So we all come from institutions, whether it's the masjid, whether it's Islamic school. So how can we use investing to make sure that these institutions are raising their levels of engagement, raising their levels of what they can do, right? So if you look at folks, if you look at institutions that have 10, 20, 100,000, right? We have institutions in Dallas that has $1 million sitting in the bank, right? I call this lazy money. How many people get up every day and work hard, right? And they work hard, their husbands, their wives work hard. That's it? Everybody should have their hand raised, right? And what would you do if you had someone who was old, who was mature, right? They can have the ability to work, and they just sat in their room all day and watched TV. Wouldn't you be a little upset? So when you leave your money in your bank, that's what your money is doing in the bank. It's being lazy. It's just chilling, not doing anything, not being put to work. While you're working hard, your money is sleeping, right? We want our money to work as hard as we're working. Right? We want our money to work for us. And so we're going to talk about that. And the last thing, do we have any imams in the room? Any imams in the room? Do you all know imams? Raise your hand if you know imams. Okay, everybody knows an imam. We have a special investment program for imams because they say that 70% of the imams have no retirement, right? So that way the imam is never going to leave, right? He has no retirement. And 40% of the imams are living paycheck to paycheck. So we have a special investment program for imams, and we're going to talk about that. So, bismillah. Goals of investing. There's usually 3 things folks are looking for: capital preservation, capital growth, or current income coming from this money you have invested. And so the habits of successful investors, and we're not going to drain this one. I want to focus on one and talking about saving early and often. And in this example, the person on the left started investing $1,000 a year at the age of 25. And they invested that until the age of 35. And then they got busy and they stopped. The person on the right started investing a little later. They started investing at 35. And they invested $1,000 a year from the age 35 to 65. But don't you know that the person who started early at 25 and invested only a third is going to have $112,000, while the person on the right is going to have 101. This is based on 7% return. Can we get it back on the screen? Yeah, so the person who started early is going to have more than the person who started later but invested 3 times as much, right? So that goes to the power of compounding. And so what does it mean to be an Islamic investment company, right? What does that mean? Can you just say I'm an Islamic investment company? the first thing is that you have to have an outside company who's going to look at your portfolio and making sure that you're operating the way you say you are. So we use a company called Amani Advisors. It's based in Kuala Lumpur. It's based in Malaysia. And they review our portfolio on a quarterly basis. And on an annual basis, they give us a Sharia certificate. What are they reviewing? So we have 3 screenings. The first screen is going to be like, what is the primary business of that company? If it's pork, pornography, gambling, banking, weapons manufacturing, we're not going to invest in that company full stop. Number 2, the scholars said that it's not just what they're selling, but it's how they're operating. So we look at the debt level that they have as a company. We look at the type of assets they have. And then we're also looking at U.S. and international companies. These companies are going to have impermissible revenue. And so what the scholars have said is that the impermissible revenue can't come from their primary source. So it has to be a secondary or tertiary source, and it can't be more than 5% of their total income. Right? So if you think about a company like Southwest, Southwest is a transportation company, but they also sell alcohol on their flights. So we have to do the due diligence of saying, hey, how much alcohol revenue do they have compared to their total revenue? And for it to pass the screening, it has to be less than 5%. And the third screening is our religion is not just about what you can't do. You can't date, you can't steal, you can't eat pork, so on and so forth. It's also about what you should be doing. Like, how are you being a Khalifa on this earth? So we have a ESG screening, which stands for Environmental, Sustainable, and Governance. So how are you treating the earth? How are you leaving the earth? Are you sustainable? Do you have good governance practice? So we get a proprietary ESG score for all of our companies, and they have to pass a certain threshold in order for us to invest in them. Okay, so the first one is we're going to talk about if you're a parent thinking about your children going to college. And I know we know how important education is in our community. And the price of college is going up and up. So if you are saving for your kids to go to college, and if tuition is $15,000 and you're just saving $15,000, by the time they graduate from high school, tuition is going to still go up. So how about this? How about you replace your fancy cup of coffee? For me, that's a chai tea latte, pumpkin spice in October. That's for me. Right? You replace that fancy cup of coffee that's probably about $5 a day, $25 a week, $100 a month, and let's just say $1,000 a year. So replace that when your child is born and invest it in their education. So by the time they're 3, it will be worth $3,200, right? That's not a big deal. But let's fast forward until they're 18. When they're 18, it will be worth almost $35,000, right? And so this is based off of a 7% rate of return. So what are the mechanisms where we can save for our child's education? Number 1, we have what's called an educational savings account. So you could put in $2,000 per year per child. You could put it in up until the child is 18, and they have up until the age of 30 to use it. At the age of 30, if they don't use it, you can transfer it to a younger sibling or a younger family member. You don't get a tax deduction when you put it in, but it grows tax-free. So there's no taxes while it's growing. And then when you use it on an education-related expense, not just tuition or room and board, but you buy them a computer, if they have to travel to college, if they do a study abroad program, anything education-related, you won't have to pay taxes on the money that you use. The ESA has one kind of drawback or flaw, is that if you're a high-wage earner, there we go. Yeah. if you're a high wage earner, it limits how much you can put into an ESA. So if you make more than, there you go. If you make more than $190,000 between you and your spouse, then it limits how much money you can put in an ESA. So for those folks who have that problem, I call it a good problem, not a bad problem. We have what's called a UGMA account. Okay. So a UGMA account is a taxable account that allows you to put up to $18,000 per person per year. So in effect, it's actually unlimited because I can put in $18,000, my wife can put in $18,000, my grandparents can put in $18,000 for my son. So the UGMA account allows you to put in a lot more money than just $2,000. However, it is taxable. So any of the profit that comes out of it, you'll be taxed on it, but just the profit. But the first $1,250 of profit is going to be tax-free. The second $1,250 is going to be taxed at the child's tax rate. Then above that is going to be taxed at the parent's tax rate. And one of the good things about UGMA is that it can automatically be transferred over to the child when they reach the age of majority. And so as they grow up, they can take ownership over this investment account. Okay, the second one is when we're talking about retirement. For anyone who's a professional, this is something we really need to pay attention to. So the sources of income in retirement, you have your personal savings and investments, you have pension plans, Social Security, and employment during retirement. We want to make employment during retirement optional. We don't want to make it something that you have to do. You know, retirement in the U.S. is almost around 60 years old. The 401k plan was started in 1958. Before this, people just thought that they were going to work until they died, right? One of the things I think is fascinating is that retirement is a part of our religion, right? It talks about retirement in the Quran, but not in the way that you think, right? In Surah Yusuf, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam was interpreting the Pharaoh's dream. The Pharaoh had a dream about 7 fat cows and 7 lean ones. And the lean cows devoured the fat cows. And when he asked Prophet Yusuf about this, Prophet Yusuf said, you're going to have 7 years of great harvest where everything is going to be good. It's going to be overflowing. And then you're going to have 7 years where it's going to be very hard. You're going to have 7 years of famine. And those years of famine are going to be so hard, they're going to outstrip everything you had in those good years. And so Prophet Yusuf said, put me in charge of the storehouse, because I'll make sure that I take from these good years to provide for those lean years. And so that's what we have to do. We have to be in charge of our own storehouses so that we basically get 40 years of productivity. Those first 25 years, we're just figuring things out. We're just getting educated. Those last 20 years, we're slowing down. So you got this 40 years in your middle of your life, from 25 to 65, where you're going to be the most productive. And that you have to take a little bit from those years to provide for those years later on. And so one of my wife actually, she says, well, why should I be investing for retirement instead of putting the money away for our kids' education? I said, sweetie, you know, there's a couple of ways to pay for education. They can get a scholarship, right? They can work their way through. They go to community college. There's no other way to have a retirement than to plan for it. You know, I tell people retirement is like paradise, right? And the retirement people look at me like, no, it's not paradise, right? But I tell you, it's like paradise because you just can't show up and expect to do it. You just can't show up to paradise. I lived my life, I lied, I cheated, but I went in. You can't just show up to retirement and it's like, I want to retire. It's like, what have you prepared for it? And so, you know, we want retirement. And so when we look at the average Social Security payment, the average Social Security payment across the country in 2023 is $1,844. Can we show it on the screen? So $1,844, right? Look, I'm not recommending to give that back to Uncle Sam, but do you know what is the average rent across the 50 states? The average rent for a 2-bedroom is $1,758. So you can imagine if you're depending solely on Social Security, it might be able to pay for your rent. So when you look at personal savings and investments, we have 401ks, IRAs, stocks, mutual funds, real estate, life insurance. And then the ones in orange, annuity bonds and CDs are all based on interest or all based on riba. And so in this example, it shows you about which one? Those different options. We're going to talk about some of them. Yeah, so the question was, are we going to go over them? So we're going to go over some of them. So in this example, it's about someone starting to invest early. So if you look at someone 25 who's just starting their professional life, and they say, hey, I'm going to invest $250 per paycheck. That's $500 a month. That's $6,000 a year. If they just did that, starting at 25, when they get retirement age, they'll have over $1.3 million. But say, hey, I've been 25 before, right? I'm thinking about a lot of other things besides retirement. So say at 25, I don't do it. Fast forward, I started at 35. If I start at 35, I'm only going to have around $600,000. By waiting just one decade, you're going to lose out on the opportunity cost of over $500,000. And when you think about that, starting at 25, right? If you started at 25, by the time you're 65, you would have saved $240,000. Like, that's a lot of money. But you have over $1 million worth of gains. Can you put it back? You'll have 4 times the amount that you saved, you'll have in profit. And so what are those tools that we can use to save for that retirement? So number one is an individual retirement account. So this is a retirement account outside of your employer where you can save $7,000 a year. And if you're above 50, you can do $8,000. In the traditional, you get a tax deduction when you put it in, and it will grow tax-free. And when you retire, you'll have to pay taxes on what you take out, right? And because the individual retirement account is self-directed, you have a wide variety of things you can invest in, meaning that you can make your investments Sharia compliant. The alternative to a traditional IRA is the Roth IRA. Has the same contribution limit, $7,000 plus a $1,000 catch-up if you're over 50. Also for the Roth, you don't get a tax deduction when you put it in. It's still going to grow tax-free. But then when you're in retirement, you can take out money from your Roth without paying anything to Uncle Sam. So if you go back and you put that $250 per paycheck in a Roth IRA, then you have $1.3 million tax-free. And so when you think about retirement, retirement is not an age, it's a number. So when you think about retirement, if you have $1.3 million, right, from that you can generate $90,000 of annual income that you can use to live off of, while you still have $1.3 million in the bank. Until you pass away, and then you can leave that $1.3 million to your kids, to your grandkids, to your masjid, to your community. So the last thing about the Roth is that the Roth, because you put in the money after tax, that you can take out your contributions at any time. So you get a chance to keep some flexibility. And lastly, after 5 years, you can take the contribution and the profit out of the Roth IRA if you want to buy a home, buy a primary residence, if you're paying for anyone in your family to go to college, if you, God forbid, if you have to file for bankruptcy, if you have major medical expenses, and you can take the money out when you're 59 and a half. Moving on, we have a lot of business owners in our community. We have a lot of entrepreneurs. And so for entrepreneurs, we have other accounts that can be advantageous. So a SEP IRA will allow you to put up to $66,000. Take it off your top line as a business and save it for yourself and your family into a SEP IRA. And in addition, if you have employees, you can actually not only save for yourself, but you can also help your employees save for retirement by doing a 401k plan or 403b. So the 401k allows you to put in $23,000 a year. One of the kind of criticisms of the 401k is that you have very limited investment options. So if you have a 401k with an employer, you might not have Sharia compliant alternatives. But if you're a business owner and you start a 401k with us, you have access to the Sharia compliant mutual funds that we're about to see in a second. Additionally, if you work for AT&T or work for Google and you have a 401k and you don't have Sharia compliant options, you have two alternatives. The first one is after you leave the employer, you can roll over your 401k into an individual retirement account and invest it in a Sharia compliant manner. Number two is that while you're there, you can ask your company if they have a self-directed brokerage account. And in the self-directed brokerage account, you can invest in your 401k and use it to invest in Sharia compliant mutual funds. And so we're almost wrapping up. The Sharia compliant mutual funds is that we have 4 funds. So our 4 funds, our first fund was started in 1986. It's called the Amana Income Fund. It looks at large U.S. companies that are paying a dividend. In 1994, we started the Amana Growth Fund. It looks at large U.S. companies who are primed for growth. In 2009, we started the Amana Developing World Fund. So we had 2 domestic funds, but we wanted to give our shareholders exposure to international markets. So we started the Developing World Fund. And then in 2015, we started a fixed income fund for those shareholders who've already amassed a large sum of wealth. They want something to protect and preserve their assets. And so when we're talking about how the funds are performing, we always have to have a benchmark. Because if I say I'm going to give you a 12% return, you might feel great about it. But if you go outside and the market is giving an 18% return, then you're going to be like, you're going to feel a little different. So our benchmark for our 2 domestic funds is the S&P 500, which is the largest 500 companies in the U.S. So in this example, if you invested $10,000 in 2014 in the Amana Income Fund, it'll be worth $27,000 in 2024. That same $10,000 investment in the S&P 500 in 2014 will be worth $35,000 in 2024. But if you invested $10,000 in the Amana Growth Fund, this year it will be worth almost $42,000, 41,000, I think 447. Right? So you can see that the Amana Growth Fund kind of outperformed the market. So we look at those figures. The Amana Income Fund, the performance over the last 10 years is around 10.8. The S&P 500 was 13.4, and the Amana Growth Fund was actually 15.7. That's an annual average return over the last decade. For our Development World Fund, it was around 3.5, which was really in line with its benchmark, and the Amana Participation Fund was around 1.8. So the Amana Participation Fund is supposed to be conservative. So it's not going to give you the kind of returns that the other equity funds are going to give you. So this is my QR code. If you scan this, you'll get all my contact information. There's also a link to my Zoom calendar where you can set up an appointment with me, or we can talk about your investments, we can talk about your financial needs, we can do a financial review, so on and so forth. But two things I want to talk on about is what we can do for institutions and the Imam Investment Program. So quickly, one of the things that nonprofits have been doing over the last decade or so is they're encouraging their supporters to donate stock as opposed to cash. So for example, if you bought $1,000 of NVIDIA 4 years ago, now it's worth $40,000, $50,000. If you want to give this to the masjid, if you cash it out, you'll have to pay capital gains rate of almost $49,000, and then you have to give it to the masjid in cash. But if you donate those shares to the masjid, you donate those shares you bought for $1,000, now they're worth $50,000. When the masjid or the nonprofit receives it, they can sell it and not have to pay any capital gains. So it's been a way to really boost fundraising for nonprofit organizations. And in addition to that, many organizations have some unused cash. And so opening an investment account allows them to put that cash to work for them. So it's almost the beginning of starting an endowment for those organizations. And so you're investing your cash. Sooner or later, that's going to grow. You're going to add to it. You can start a capital campaign to actually create a walk for your community or an endowment. So those are two things that we do for institutions. And lastly, there's this Imam Investment Program that we're trying to make sure that more people know about. The Imam Investment Program has three components. So the first component is that, and if Imam invests for their future, this outside organization, a charity, will match what they put into an investment account up to 10%. So if they put in $1,000, this organization will contribute $100. And all this money is being invested for their future, right? Because we have to take care of those who take care of us. Number two, this program is also going to give them a discount on home financing, right? So they're going to get a discount on a home financing opportunity. And the third one is they actually have a scholarship that's just for imams, if imams are looking to further their education, or for their children. So if you're a child of an imam and you're looking to further your education, there's a scholarship program just for those kind of students. So that is, I wanted to be relatively quick. I'm not sure if we have any time for Q&A, but I'll go ahead and take some until people kick me off. Assalamu alaikum. She said, while I'm here, are we able to meet one-on-one? Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Let's set up the time. We go here and then there, and then right here. Self-directed brokerage. Mm-hmm. So the question was a self-directed brokerage at your company. So usually what a company will do, like for example, say AT&T, Fidelity manages their 401k. So AT&T will tell Fidelity, give our employees, give our own employees an opportunity to have a brokerage account in their 401k. And then they will say they can put up to 50%, 75%, so on and so forth. And then in that brokerage account, you can pick what you want to invest in. And so, if you send me an email, I can look up whether your company has a self-directed brokerage account as well, too. Okay, inshallah. Definitely. So the question was a ESA compared to a 529 plan. And does it have to be just used for education? So I talked about two accounts. The first one was the ESA. So the ESA is education-related expenses. So if it's not education, maybe a computer for education, so on and so forth. And so you could put in money up to the age of 18, and then the child has to use it by the time they're age 30. For graduate school, for postdoc, so on and so forth. If they don't use it, you can transfer it to another family member, the ESA account. The 529 has similar rules. The good thing about the 529, it lets you put in more money. So it lets you put up to $18,000 a year. The downside about the 529 is that it doesn't have any Sharia-compliant investment options. One of the things that we're working on at Amana Mutual Funds is working with different states to get them to offer our mutual funds on their platform for 529s. And so once that happens, we probably won't be doing ESAs anymore. We'll kind of direct people to open a 529 in those states that will allow for Sharia-compliant investment options. We got any questions from the brothers? So he said, what is the difference between the amount of mutual funds and our mutual funds and regular kind of investments? Is that it? So the number... Oh, that's great. So he said, what is the difference about the income that's generated from the investment? So people often ask me, like, how is this not riba? Like, how is this not, haram in terms of the growth? So the growth is not a loan. You're not loaning Amana Mutual Funds money. You're investing in a company. So you're buying a company. And so when you buy that company, you get two forms of income. The first income is you get dividends, right? So they're giving the profit back over to the people who own it, and you are owner of the company. You're owner of Apple. You're owner of Microsoft. You're owner of Eli Lilly. Number two is what happens to the value of companies that perform well. They go what? They go up, right? So you bought a company, pizza company XYZ, and they got the best pizza in Orlando. And so they're going to open another store, and then another store, and then the value of that company is going to rise. So maybe you bought it for, you invested $100 in it, but after 10 years, your $100 investment is worth $1,000 because the company has so much revenue. So those are the two types of, you get capital increase because the company is worth more, and you also get profit is distributed to the owners. So there's no loans that are involved in this whole process, right? It's a process of investing. And the difference between us and other kind of funds is that we're making sure that our investments are not investing in things that are not acceptable to us as Muslims. So we're not buying Wynn Casino Company. We're not buying Smithfield Pork Company. We're not buying Boeing Company. Right? And people are like, well, what's wrong with Boeing? Who is making the jets that are bombing different countries around